Is, oh, I'm on. How are you doing? Good. I'm okay. I'm good. Well, how are we doing? How are we doing? Everybody okay? Yeah. I've had a long week. It's only Tuesday. It's been one of those, yeah. But don't worry about old Tim, because he's leaving Friday morning to go take care of his 4 grandchildren under the age of 10 for 4 days. And their parents are very, how do I use the term? They're very careful about COVID. And their children have become a pack of wolves because they haven't gone anywhere for 2 years except with pretty much with each other. And I love them, but working at poor Cindy. He has nightmares. Does it? So look at that. Is it? There we go. There we go. I keep worrying about this, that they're going to find out that it's got something to do with me. Like, I've never had any metal put into my body, but it's like that's what I worry about. You tell me, you got me? Okay, good. All right, good. Well, hey, I'm excited about tonight's class, but I don't know that we'll get to the part that I'm excited about. So, we probably will. I hope we do, because I'm anxious to get into chapter 10. Can you believe it? I do have that one announcement about the class that next week is Tech Week for Little Mermaid, and they don't want anybody doing anything in the building if it's not Little Mermaid next week. So we will not have class next week, and we'll send something out to the class to let everybody know again. But then we'll just meet the next week during Little Mermaid. They don't, once they've teched it out. I don't know anything about plays, but putting on plays. But apparently, once they get it figured out, that week in between the Sunday to Thursday when they don't have any performances, it's just regularness. So we'll have class. So we just have 1 week off. But I just found that out today at 5 o'clock. So I knew there was a week, but I didn't know which one it was. So anyway, so we are ready. We have been plowing through this section that is an inclusio, the section from verse 33 to 50, and we'll finish it tonight. And we are, I believe, 49, verse 49. Is that where we are? Yeah. So let me pray for us. I don't think I have anything else to tell you. Oh, I will tell you that there's a funeral this Thursday that I'm doing in Central, and they're turning this room into a Jimmy Buffett party afterwards. So it's like, if you like Jimmy Buffett, I won't make any statement about Jimmy Buffett, but I'll just say that in here on Thursday at 7:30, and it was funny, and I love her, Becca Wilds, whose husband Jason died. He was 49 and he died in his sleep of a heart attack. And she said, and with a dead straight face, she said, because we offered a meal in this thing afterwards, and she said, I want wings and chips and dip and everything that he wasn't supposed to eat that caused this thing, and we're just going to live on that stuff that night. And I thought that was really funny. So if you like wings and if they're vegetable, she said no vegetable trays unless there's little big vats of dip for the vegetables. And it's like, so I just found that just really funny that that's what she said. But anyway. So it'll happen, and I don't know what's going to be going on, but it'll be at 7:30 in here, Jimmy Buffett, and there you go. So anyway, let me pray for us. Lord, first I want to lift up Becca and her family, and at this time I know that it's both a tragedy that she has no idea how to get her arms around, and then it's just the hubbub of all the things that would come to a woman of her age who suddenly finds herself a widow. I pray for her and her boys, and that you'll, as the families coming in from out of town, that you'll be gracious to them at this time, and I pray that you'll give me the right words to say to at least give some comfort to the family. I also pray, Lord, for tonight. Thank you that we can look at your word and that what you have to say to us in these few verses even will be things that can move us to be better followers of you. I pray that for us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. If I can tell you one more ironic thing, the man who died, Jason, he was a heavily tattooed, chain-smoking kind of hellraiser, and he married this girl from Taylor who was homeschooled at a Christian school, and we're talking how that happened, I do not know, but he didn't get saved until later in that room where we're doing the thing, not fully under my preaching, but apparently I had a lot of influence, and because he asked me to baptize him. And I baptized him with Jim Falk, whose funeral is Friday. And that's just really kind of ironic, I don't know, so there you have it. I'm not going to bring that. I'm going to bring up that I baptized him, but I'm not going to bring up with Jim Falk at the funeral, so. Anyway, we're at verse 49. We've been talking about, we just got through with this whole section about, and last week I talked a lot about hell, didn't I? Sorry. I'll try not to talk about it this week much. And then but verse 49, and remember we're in the midst of this, and all the connections are we've just talked about the fact that the fire never goes out and the maggots never die. And so then the word fire comes up in the next verse, and Jesus says, for everyone will be tested with fire. And then it says, salt is good for seasoning. Now, I'll come back to that in a minute, but that is not what it says in the Greek. And then it says, but if it loses its flavor, how do you make it salty again? You must have the qualities of salt among yourself and live in peace with each other. Now, can I just say that in the Greek, it literally says, verse 49, it literally says, everyone shall be salted with fire, is what it literally says. It doesn't say tested, it says salted with fire. And so we're going to have to talk a lot about salt. Because every one of these sentences that has salt in it is using salt in a different way. All right? Salt's a really hugely important ancient substance. I'll be talking a lot about it, but both fire and salt were purifying agents in the ancient world. To be salted with fire, which is exactly what it says, everyone will be salted with fire, is a picture of the ultimate purification of something. It's the cleansing away of the dross, if that's right. And the reason that dross is a good word for that, I'll tell you in a minute why. It is cleansing of the dross in a profound way to say that something will be salted with fire. Here, what Jesus is saying, essentially, when he says that one sentence, when he says, everyone will be tested with fire, I understand fully why the New Living Testament translates it that way, because if it said everyone will be salted with fire, we wouldn't have any idea what they were saying, because it's a phrase from the ancient world. But to say it that way means that we are going to be tested in ways that will prove the goodness of our lives. Now, he's talking directly to the disciples, but I'm pretty sure that he was saying this is a primary statement to everybody to think about. Clearly, it caught Peter's ear when it was said, and he must have said it a lot. And I'm sure that when he talked about it, when he talked about this sentence, this statement by Jesus, that he was saying, yes, there are going to be things that come into our lives that are we are going to be salted with fire in order to get rid of all the impurities within us, to make us people who are what? Pure in our lives. That things are going to come into our lives that need to cleanse out the stuff that's of no value, and going to focus us in on what is of real value and make us people of real value. Now, that's not very exciting, but it's true. It's true. It says he says everyone will be salted with fire. And again, the only reason this connects to the statements around it is because of the words fire and salt. But Jesus was letting him know that surely in their lives something was going to come along, a testing. Now, here's the problem. To say that, as it says in here, it says everyone will be tested with fire. That implies, if you think about it that way, if you think about it a minute, it means that, like, at some point there's going to be fire that burns away everything that's of no value in you. And a lot of times people take that to be what happens at the end of time. You know what I'm saying? It's like you're going to stand before God and you're going to get tested with fire, and then we're going to find out if there's anything good in you. And this is not what salted with fire meant. Salted with fire is something that comes into your life that cleans you up in this space. Okay? And I bet we could go person to person, and you could all name something in your life where something came into your life and it changed who you were because it was a testing or it was something that really pressed you into the best you can be. I'm just sure we've all had things like that. We go through times in our lives where where things coming after us are aggressively changing us to be better people. I mean, I just think that's true. Now, I don't know how the disciples really felt about this. Sometimes I have to say that Jesus letting the disciples know that salting with fire was going to come and was going to be a good thing. I don't know that they would have been happy about that. I don't know that they would be happy about it. But still, I mean, somehow I have to believe in my heart of hearts that the things that I go through are going to. The big test with fire in the ancient world was not on salt, but it was on gold. And because they would have to burn off the dross. Now, I got a lot to tell you about salt, and I'm going to have to warn you before we start going down the salt road. I spent a year doing Roman British archaeology And guess what I was excavating most of the time? A town called Sapperton, which, oh, look, he has a picture of the Finland. So you know what that is? That's probably the Kardike. But I know way too much about this. But we excavated a city called Sapperton, which was about 23 miles or so from the shore, but which had been on the shore when they built the town. And guess what they did in that town? They made salt. And we dug up the salt-making factories, spaces. And actually, there was a graduate student there when I was there who we found enough stuff that they could remake the salt-making furnaces. And this woman, remade all the parts and made salt. A lot of it with stuff that had been originally made in the 2nd century. Well, I had to learn a lot about salt, so look out, okay? Just look out. By the way, salt was so valuable that it was oftentimes the payment to soldiers because the commodity itself was of such value. The word for salt in Latin is sal. We have, what do you get when you get a job? You get a salary, because people used to get paid in salt, because you could trade it so easily. It was so valuable as a commodity. Now, this whole thing, and the reason to be salted with fire is a sense of the ultimate way to get to the bottom of something's purity is because salt and fire were the two ways of what they did with salt was they did put it on food, but mostly they preserved meat with it, and they preserved leather with it. It was a preservative. And that's the primary image most of the time. It does make things taste better. Now remember, they're a world where they don't have most of the seasoning that we have, and salt would be a great thing. But salt was really hard to come by. It's really hard to come by. I'm going to get ahead of myself. Let me just stick with the text, okay? For everyone will be tested with fire. I just want to let you know that this statement is just to tell us that following Jesus may not be all bed of roses. And the other thing is that I know in my own life, I think I've been tested with fire a number of times, and the end result is that I'm a better man. And I doubt that the disciples like to hear that. I don't like to hear it, but Jesus said it. But the next verse, salt is good for seasoning. Now that's what it says. It says salt is good for seasoning. The word there in the Greek for seasoning actually means to prepare food. It's good for the preparation of food. And everybody listening to him would go, well, you're right about that, Jesus. You're right about that. But then he says, but if it loses its flavor, how do you make it salty again? This is a very odd statement in our world because do you guys know this, that salt cannot break down and lose its saltiness? It just doesn't. Real salt, pure salt, does not lose its saltiness. But in the ancient world, pure salt was almost impossible to get. There were two means, here we go. There were two means of getting salt in the ancient world. One was mining, salt mining. And that work was horrible. And almost all the work was done by slaves who had been captured in war. When the Romans needed workers for the salt mines, You've heard people say, oh no, they sent them to the salt mines. You've heard that phrase. Well, that's the phrase is that way because when the Romans needed salt mine workers, because the work was so horrible and nasty, they would just go conquer somebody and drag all the slaves off to work in the salt mines. But salt in the ground has to be purified. When we get it, it's been through all kinds of processes to get it pure. And what they get out of the ground tends to be, it tends to be filled with all kinds of impurities. What passed for salt was you would not want then. And much of it, some of it they would refine it through burning off the bad stuff. But a lot of times they just ship it out the way that it came. And it would be so much, such an impure substance that what they used it for, they had a use for it. They would throw it on dung piles, and it would, rather than preserve the dung, it would break it down in some manner because it's had so much organic material in it. So they would use salt. And in fact, there is a verse that says when it loses its salt loses its saltiness and it's worthless for anything but what? Throwing on the dung pile. And so it could lose it that way. The other way that they got salt was the way that I excavated, the things that I excavated. And they are furnaces where they would burn or boil salt water. And then once they had these furnaces and they had these trays with the salt water in it, and it was kind of a complicated endeavor, but when they're done, they'd have this thin little layer of salt in the trays. Yeah, there you go. Now that's brine. There is a fire underneath those? Those don't look anything like what we did. But yeah. Yeah, you're probably not going to be able to find Saperton online, I don't think. But salt, yeah. But anyway, it was a lot of work. It was really valuable. And again, they used it it was a medicine that they cleaned wounds with. It was a seasoning which they used very rarely, but they made the brine and they would store meat in brine. And so it's really expensive. Now it says, what was the verse? I'm sorry, I'm wandering around here. But can you put the verse back? Yeah. Salt is good for seasoning, but if it loses its flavor, how do you make it salty again? Now that's where he stops. It's a rhetorical question. He does not answer the question. Well, the answer to how you make it salty again is you burn it up and burn it with the fires that burn off the stuff that's bad in it. Now that's the only thing. Now see, he's saying that salt is a good thing. Now here's the deal. The next thing he says is you must have qualities of salt among yourselves. The qualities of salt could be that we are to be the flavor in the world that takes this world that is the taste of the world, it leaves a bad taste in our mouths, and we as followers of Jesus come in and we make it taste better. It could be that. And it could be that we are the essence of that which brings purification to things. And it could also be that which preserves things. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount said straight up, you are the salt of the earth, of the world. In the phrase, and where it also says, you are the city set on a hill and all those other things that he says that are good. I don't know what he was thinking when he says, you must have qualities of salt among yourselves. I don't know if Jesus was thinking, you disciples need to be the people who bring life back, flavor back to life, because life is so flavor, I guess that's a hard word to say, but flavorful, without something in it that just brings out the goodness of it. Or he could be saying, you need to be that which preserves the world from the rot he could be saying that. Or you need to be that which perfects the world. It goes in and brings goodness into the world. You see? And you know what? For my thing, I'm okay with all of them. I'm not so sure that I've yet figured out exactly what it would mean for Christians to be people who bring flavor to life. Maybe Little Mermaid is that part of that. I don't know. Joy. I don't know. But it's worth thinking about. It's worth thinking about. But this is an interesting thing because it's in the plural. You must have qualities of salt among yourselves. He's not saying that individuals should have this as a quality of the way of their life. I think that's an okay thing, that I'm an agent for preserving the goodness in the world. I'm an agent for making life more exciting or worthwhile or whatever. But that's not what he's saying. He's saying you need to have it amongst yourselves. Now remember, these are guys who just had a big fight with each other about who's the greatest. And they also tried to kick some guy out who was, they tried to stop a guy who was doing exorcism stuff. And so he's telling them you need to do what? You need to live what? With the qualities of salt among yourselves as a community. As a community. And then he adds, and live in peace with each other. Well, peace is a big word. And remember, it started out with them arguing against, this whole section starts out with them arguing against each other, and he finishes it off with saying you need to have peace with each other. The two bookends, arguing and at peace. And somehow the qualities of salt are supposed to represent that which we do together. And the problem is that almost all of the qualities of salt, we think about something that we do to the world. And so this is a good chance for us to, I don't know that you want to do this, everybody. It'd be good to have just a sit down and we just talk about what is it that we can do between us in the way that we interact with one another, in the way we treat one another, in the way that we do life together as followers of Jesus so that we have salt among us. Because the only way that we can be the salt of the earth is if we have enough salt among us that when we all go out into the world together, we make a difference. And this is what he's talking about. This is what he's talking about. He couldn't have picked a more powerful image in their world because there is a book called Salt. And I forget the guy's name that wrote it, but it's not that old. And all it is tells how the whole history of the world of the Western world revolves around salt. And you can follow it, and it's a fascinating book. I have it somewhere. It must be in my office. But he could not have picked something that was more... The only other thing he could have picked was gold, and almost nobody had gold. But everybody wanted salt. Think about it. This is a culture that barely ever eats meat because your animals are giving you milk and fur to make your clothes out of. So you don't eat meat except on rare occasions. And when you kill an animal, think about this for a minute. If you kill the fatted cow and your family isn't 150 people, you're going to have a lot of cow left over when you're done. And the only way to save it is to brine it up. And the only way to brine it up is to have enough salt to make a brine that's strong enough to save that meat. This is a really important material. And so Jesus is saying that these characters of this material are that important that we need to have it within our beings. If we do, the end result will be that we have peace. That we have peace. I think that's cool. I think that's cool. Is that enough on salt? You guys, is that good enough? Did you catch that? Again, this is an inclusio. It has bookends. Everything within it is how do we live as disciples of Jesus. And we've already heard all this stuff. We're supposed to be humble. We're supposed to put others in front of ourselves. We're supposed to live as servants of all, and we're also supposed to have qualities within our lives that change the world for the better. And we should always expect in the middle of that there will be testing that comes into our lives while we're following Jesus that will change us, but will be like being salted with fire. So it's the good with the bad. That's what we need to tell people when we tell them. We need to not tell them that their finances will get better if they follow Jesus. They may become salt. Isn't that funny that being salty means that you're kind of dirty-mouthed? Isn't that what it's salty. So anyway, I don't know where that came from. Maybe from sailors. Yeah, maybe from sailors. Probably, yeah. Well, that's good. We've just finished chapter 9. And we only have 6 more to go. I'm excited about the next section, though. I'm going to go a few more minutes, okay? I'm going to go a few more minutes, and then we'll take a break. I'm just really excited about this because this section... Wait 1 second. Let me look at my notes to make sure I didn't deny you some salt information. What? Oh, I don't know nothing on it. Yeah, I don't know that pepper's ever mentioned in the Bible. Yeah, I'll just say this. I'll read this to you. Jesus was using these pictures to get us to think and to take stock of our lives and to live in a way that brings flavor and peace into our worlds. Yeah. One other thing I have to... Right before we got to this section, right before we came to this teaching section, there was a moment where Jesus was on the Mount of Transfiguration. And do you remember what God said to the disciples on the Mount of Transfiguration? He said, "This is my son." And then he said, "Listen to him." And then he comes down and they have that bit with the demon, and then he goes into all this stuff we just had. I think that's interesting. He says, "Listen to him," and then we get things that we better listen to. And this little section that's taken us weeks to go through is just filled with marching orders. Marching orders. Yeah. It was interesting. I was talking with Jason Wild, who passed away, is with his family, about him, and they were just ticking off the boxes in this section. And I just couldn't help but think about it. And then one of the members of the family said, and I was not there because Rebecca told me that she had said this, that Jason died at his best. I thought, how cool. How cool that somebody in the family would say that when he died, he was at his zenith of being a follower of Jesus. And really, they talked about him being humble and putting other people in front of himself and not wanting to be first, and all the stuff that's everything they kept saying. It was just like when he was in the room, the room came alive because he looked in everybody's eyes and treated them all with great dignity, and he was just on and on. I'm thinking, good Lord, oh, to be so praised at the end of my life. And he was only 49. And I just thought that was cool. Anyway, on we go. This next section is the section on divorce, okay? I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to read the whole thing, and then we need to talk a minute about some stuff, and then we'll get into it. And I only brought enough to go through verse 4, okay? But that's about 17 pages of notes, so here we go. Then Jesus left Capernaum and went down to the region of Judea and into the area east of the Jordan River. Once again, crowds gathered around him, and as usual, he was teaching them. Pharisees came and tried to trap him with this question: should a man be allowed to divorce his wife? And Jesus answered them with a question. What did Moses say in the law about divorce? Well, he permitted it, they replied. He said a man can give his wife a written notice of divorce and send her away. But Jesus responded, he wrote this commandment only as a concession to your hard hearts. But God made them male and female from the beginning of creation. This explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Since they are no longer two, but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. Later, when he was alone with his disciples in the house, they brought up the subject again, and he told them, whoever divorces his wife and marries someone else commits adultery against her, and if a woman divorces her husband and marries someone else, she commits adultery. And can I just tell you that that is so loaded with contextual stuff from the first century that we can hardly understand it when we just read it, okay? So we got a lot to talk about. But I want to start out with the very first. Then Jesus left Capernaum. And it says, and went down to the region of Judea into the area of the Jordan River. Now, where Jesus is he's great. He's up north. See where Capernaum is way up there? And it says that he came, and then it says down. It doesn't say down. It just says he went that direction. The reason that they say down in our translation is so that we'll know he's going south, because we always think down is south. And I just want you to know, and some of you already heard me say this a million times, when it says down in the scripture, it does not mean in direction south, it means in elevation. Up and down is not, because they didn't have maps. They didn't have a picture like this in their head. So if it says down, and it doesn't say down in the Greek here, it just says he went there. But they're trying to get us to think this way in the translation, because this is really, really important for this passage. And what has happened is he's in Capernaum, and he goes around the Sea of Galilee, probably, or else he goes under the Sea of Galilee and crosses the Jordan into Decapolis on the south end. And he's coming down south. I said down, didn't I? He's coming, I can't even talk without saying down. He's coming south along the east side of the Jordan. And he's on his way, and we have just hit the crossroads in the book of Mark. Up till here, we've had everything happening primarily in Galilee and north, but all up there. And Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem for one reason, and that's to go to the cross. So everything from here on out is Jesus on his way to fulfill his mission to go to the cross. And when he comes southward, he stays on that side because he doesn't want to go into Samaria, because the Samaritans and the Jews will kill each other. They hate each other. And then you know that any time he ends up in Samaria, it is like, what? And so just always remember that if there's ever a Samaritan or he's in Samaria, he is out of line, and everybody with him is really nervous. And so, because those people they treated each other the same way the Sunnis and the Shias treat each other, as if they are not real people. Okay. And he's coming down here, and he's going to get to Bethany, and he's going to cross over and go to Jerusalem. Now, this is the important moment right here. What's happening is that in Galilee and all the way down through Decapolis and into Perea, he's in the territory that's ruled by Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas was one of the three sons of Herod the Great. When Herod the Great died, he left three parts of his kingdom, if you will, to three sons, and one of those sons failed miserably in, oh, there he is. He's kind of a good-looking guy, I guess. I mean, I don't know good-looking guys. That's one of my gifts, my spiritual gifts, is that I cannot tell when a man is good-looking. I never tell you that. It's just, I have no idea. It's like when people say, he's a good-looking guy. He looks like a guy to me. Anyway, but if he crosses over the Jordan onto that other side, he goes into Judea. And guess who's ruling in Judea? A proconsul sent there by Rome named Pilate, because nobody who had ever tried to control the Jews in Judea had ever been successful, and the Romans were just done with it, and they sent Herod there to rule there. Now here's the deal. John the Baptist, why'd he get in trouble? Because he said that Herod Antipas and his wife Herodias, who had both divorced their mates through the now this is the important part, through the Jewish process of divorce, which was this, that all you had to do was give your wife a sheet of paper that said that she was divorced, and she was divorced. And Herodias, are they John the Baptist and Herod Antipas? Okay, yeah. Look at him over there telling him what to do. And his wife's right there going, don't listen to him, don't listen, let's kill him, let's kill him. Herodias was married to Philip. Philip was Herod's brother, Antipas's brother. Herod and Herodias, she was, by the way, named after their dad. Herodias was named after Herod the Great. But anyway, she even gave him a certificate of divorce because she thought she was powerful enough as a powerful ruler that she was, that she could divorce her husband in the manner that only men could do in the Jewish world. Herod had divorced his wife, which, by the way, he was married to someone from Perea, yeah, and they had a war over it because the father was furious about that. This is a huge political thing that would have been all over the news back then. But can I have the map again? Here's the deal. When John the Baptist said to them that what you've done is wrong, this is a sin against God, and you can't divorce like that. And you can't marry your brother's wife. What happened? They got mad and they put him in jail. And what did Herodias do? She worked the system to get John the Baptist's head chopped off. This is later in the book. In chapter 3, in Mark, Jesus was talking about who has authority over the law. Herod Antipas wanted his father's title, the King of the Jews, and the Romans would not give it to him. And he wanted it because the position of King of the Jews made it possible for him to appoint the high priest. And if he could appoint the high priest, he would have a puppet in the position, and then who would be in charge of the law? Herod. Jesus had claimed authority over the law way back in chapter 3 of Mark, and in the end of chapter 3 you will read that it says the Pharisees and the followers of Herod, who hated each other generally, then began to plot to kill Jesus. Okay? They went away and met with supporters of Herod to plot how to kill Jesus. This is really important because, and now finish up and then you guys need a break from me. If you go back to the map, everything from Galilee, east and south, down through Bethany and even down this far is controlled by Herod. But the minute that Jesus crosses the Jordan, he's under the control of Pilate. And so they have to come up with something to get Jesus in trouble in the same way that John the Baptist got in trouble, because they want to kill him and they don't want to do it. They want him to do something that will make Herod and Herodias mad, and she'll just kill him too. But the minute Jesus gets to across the river, they can't do a thing about it. Is this making sense? This question about divorce is a trap. And what Jesus has to say really has more to do with them trying to trap him than it has to do with anything else. And we have to look at this in that context. And so, everybody got this? This is really important, because if you just grab this out and you ignore the front half of this whole thing, you don't know what's going on. Jesus is just making massive statements about something that has a huge impact in people's lives, and we don't even know why he said it. Is this making sense? You got all this? So what's happening when it says that they came to him with this question? And I'll talk more about that after the break. Okay, they're trying to catch him in two ways. They've got two ways to get him killed. Okay? So I'll talk about that when we get back. Okay, we can get going. Yeah, what's it? Just say salt on the front? Yeah, that's the book. Yeah, that's the book. Yeah. Oh, here's the thing Jeff, our great guy up there, is doing too. If you want to just get together and read the scripture, talk and pray, it's a good thing. Okay, so now you all know what's going on when Jesus leaves Capernaum and down to the region of Judea and into the area east of the Jordan River. Again, he's east of the Jordan River, so he's still under Herod's control, but his intention is absolutely from here on out to go to Jerusalem and go to the cross. So that's what's happened in the book. We have turned a corner. And we're not going to get very many miracles. We're going to get teaching and talking about what's coming. And that's where we're headed. Okay? Well, the next verse, that verse says, once again, crowds gathered around him. I just want to say two things about, and then it says, and as usual, he was teaching them. This is the only place in the book of Mark where the word crowd is in the plural. Everywhere else, the crowd is a singular, and there's a reason. Because in the other places where it talks about the crowd, we are always supposed to be suspicious of a crowd. The crowd. That means a gathering of people who we're not sure whether they're trustworthy when it comes to following Jesus. This is a clue. But when we get a crowds, the one time we get it here, crowds, which is meaning multiple times, large groups of people have come out to Jesus. This is important because he's come down, oh, the map's not there, but he's come down this direction. He's moving towards Jerusalem, and everywhere he goes, big groups of people come out to hear him. And the Greek in there says, and he was teaching them, and the translation is sort of like, as he was wont to do. I think that word is really funny. W-O-N-T, as he was wont to do, which means, do you remember what he wanted to do just before this section? He wanted to get alone with his disciples. He wanted to be alone with them because he had things he wanted to teach them. But then the moment that he starts to head towards Jerusalem, his whole thing shifts, and he's now speaking to the masses, big groups of people, and it says as he did regularly, or as usual is the way they say here. Well, it's not been very usual for a while, but now all of a sudden this is now the way that Jesus is functioning. And just a couple of things about it. There's nothing secretive about what Jesus had to say. The book of Mark is always the gospel that people say there's the divine secret and all this. Well, this tells us right here that Jesus was teaching everybody. He did it all the time. He wanted people to hear what he had to say. And it mentions nothing about the fact in here that what he's doing is performing miracles and casting out demons and stuff like that. It says he's teaching them. Why? Because what he has to say is from whom? God himself. And so this is really an important moment. He is on his way to the cross, guys. He's going to go to the cross. He knows it. And so he wants to take advantage of every moment that he has to get some truth out to as many people as he possibly can, because he wants them to have this truth resident in their souls in some manner when they hear in just a while that Jesus was killed, but he rose from the dead. And they'll go, well, what he said resonates with my heart because, and this makes perfect sense. This makes perfect sense. And so, anyway, once again, the crowds gathered around him. And as usual, he was teaching. We have the scene. He's going south. And then it says, boom. Some Pharisees came and tried to trap him with this question. Now, the truth is, I have to be honest, some Pharisees is not in the Greek, in the oldest texts. It just says, and they came and questioned him, is all that it says. Okay. There weren't very many people who were trying to, and the word question does not mean like they came up with something they just really wanted the answer to. You know, it's really been bothering me. What it actually means is to test someone, and actually it means to throw them off their guard. It means to put them in a defensive position. Now, there aren't very many people in that world who were what? Throwing Jesus off his guard, other than the Pharisees at the time. And they have a reason for wanting to test him in this way. And the test is not to see if he gets the right answer. They want him to give the wrong answer. They want him to give the wrong answer politically, because they want Herod Antipas and his wife to find out that Jesus said the wrong thing. Now, Jesus could also say the wrong thing on something else. The question is, should a man be allowed to divorce his wife? And that's exactly what the question is. Is a man allowed to divorce his wife? Now, can I just tell you that that's a really stupid question? Because there was no question in their world whether a man could divorce his wife. This was not an issue. Divorcing your wife was never questioned. It had never been questioned. In fact, until we get to Moses, when we start to get the rules that we talk about later, divorce was a verbal issue. All a man had to do was go, the eggs are burnt. Goodbye. That's all it took. And now, I have to say, there were two worlds of divorce in the ancient world at this time. In the year 50 BC, the Romans had codified divorce for the entire empire. And you know who got a pass on the Roman rules? The Jews. The Jews got all kinds of passes on Roman law because they were the most difficult people to live with, and so they constantly were allowing them to do what they wanted just to keep them from rebelling. All right? The Roman law said that you had to go to court to get a divorce. A woman could take her husband to court for divorce on grounds of, they had lots of grounds written in the law, and then men could take their wives to court for divorce. And the reason for the court was because they needed to divide the property, or to divide things in some way of justice. The Romans had law that functioned everywhere, but in where? In Judea and Galilee. And guess what the rule was in Judea and Galilee? It was that a man could divorce his wife, and he just had to follow the Mosaic law, and we'll get to that in a minute. But here's the deal. There were two schools of rabbinical thinking. One was Hillel, and the other was Shammai. And their schools of thinking are really, really different. I want to make sure I get this right. Give me 1 second. Hillel was a liberal. Yes, Shammai was the conservative. Moses said in Deuteronomy 24, in the first 4 chapters, in a passage, there it is. Okay, let's just read it, okay? Because I want you to know that this passage is not about divorce per se. It is a passage about whether or not a man can remarry a wife that he's previously divorced. All right? And it says, suppose a man marries a woman, but she does not please him. Remember that phrase, does not please him, okay? Remember that. Having discovered something wrong with her, remember that one too. He writes a document of divorce, hands it to her, and sends her away from his house. When she leaves his house, she is free to marry another man. But if the second husband also turns against her, writes a document of divorce, hands it to her, and sends her away, or if he dies, the first husband may not marry her again, for she has been defiled. That would be detestable to the Lord. You must not bring guilt upon the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a special possession. Now there you have it. There's all we've got about divorce for the Old Testament, okay? There it is. Boom. The Jewish scholars argued about, and the word up there where it says, discover something wrong with her, it's and I should look it up. Yeah, it's a Hebrew word there. It literally means nakedness of a thing. It must have meant something when Moses first wrote this that was lost by the time we get to the time of Jesus and these scholars who are arguing, Hillel and Shammai. Because here's the deal. The nakedness of a thing can't be adultery, because adultery was punishable by stoning, it was death. So it has to be something else. And they talked all about it. And they found it to be, it was translated kind of like this, an indecency, something like that. Well, Shammai, he was conservative, and in his rabbinical school, he taught that indecency had to be adultery. It had to be something really strong for a man to divorce his wife. And he had followers, and they all followed that in those rules in their lives. Hillel, on the other hand, he was the liberal. And he said, no, when it says she does not please him, there's something wrong. Why, that could just mean that, well, I said burn the eggs. That was actually burning breakfast was one of the things that was listed in his writings. He also said that she's just not as beautiful as the lady next door. She's just not pleasing him. It could also be that he finds her uninteresting, or that her breath smells terribly in the morning. He can divorce her. The rule went like this. If a man wanted to divorce his wife, he couldn't just throw her out. He had to write her a certificate. The word is actually biblion, which is interestingly the diminutive of the word biblos, which gives us book, which literally means the length of a reading that is best for after-dinner entertainment. And that's the word that we get Bible from, of all things, or book, but that's neither here nor there. But the point is, biblion is a little writing, a certificate. The vast majority of Jewish men were illiterate. The reason for the certificate was twofold. To make them go find somebody who could write it down, because then they'd have to think twice about it. They'd have to go to somebody and go, now I need you to fill out this certificate for me because I want to divorce my wife because her breath stinks in the morning. They didn't have to say that on the certificate, by the way. I actually will talk to you about that in a minute. But they just had to say that they were divorced. And the other reason was that if she had that certificate, it proved that if she went out and was with another man and got married to another man, that she wasn't committing adultery against her first husband. Because if she had no proof of it and he gets mad about something and doesn't like the dude that she's suddenly with, he can come back and say, well, I never divorced her. She's committing adultery. And guess what happens then? She can be stoned to death. See, and by the way, a divorce was not romantic in any manner. The word that is used in both the Hebrew and the Greek that is now translated divorce simply means to give up your right to some use of your property. Okay? Now I want you to take all this stuff in, because can you see, I'm building a case here to tell you that Jesus was living in a world where women had no rights, and the two schools were fighting over whether or not a guy could just write off And guess who was more popular, by the way? Hillel was more popular because why? Because it made it possible for a man to divorce his wife by simply giving her a certificate. And she had to go. And she not only had to go, and you've heard this before from me, I'm sure, but that she only got what her father had given to her husband at the time of their marriage as a dowry. And he had to keep that. And it could be a slave, or it could be property, not very often though, clothes, money. He had to give that back to her. But most people were not terribly wealthy, and the dowry was not very big, and so it really wasn't much of a hardship. Some women were rich, and the husband didn't want to get rid of them because the dowry would cost them so much. But the point is that if a woman was let go, and she didn't have that certificate, there's no way she could marry. And she needed to marry because women were not allowed to work, except in, guess what, 2 professions: slavery and prostitution. You getting my point? You getting my point? Can we go back to the text? So everybody's arguing over this. They said, should a man be allowed to divorce his wife? Well, yeah, that's the wrong question. And Jesus answers them, well, what did Moses say in the law about divorce? What he does is he turns, as a typical rabbinical thing, he turns the question back on them. Because he knows that what they're trying to do is what? They're trying to trap him in one of 2 ways. The question is a man allowed to divorce his wife? Well, who divorced his wife? Herod. Also, who's the most popular spokesman for Jewish law? Hillel. And he says a man can divorce his wife or anything. And if Jesus comes down on the side of saying, I'm with this dude as opposed to this dude in terms of a rabbinical school, again, people killed each other over these kinds of differences. Jesus would lose, if he said anything against Hillel in that moment, they would have created a fuss. And so they're trying to get him, and so Jesus is trying to be really careful not to offend Herod, Shammai, or Hillel in his response. But what he's going to do is really complicated, and we're not going to talk about it. We'll talk about it in 2 weeks. But he says, they say, well, he permitted, and he didn't say, and if you go back and look at it, it says, what did Moses tell you to do? And here's the deal. When Moses speaks in the Jewish world, Moses is not talking. God is talking. All right? Moses is the words of God. And he says, what did Moses tell you? And they don't go to that place what Moses commanded. They say Moses permitted. It's a different thing. They've tried to change the subject because they don't want to be held accountable for all of what Moses said as being from God. And they replied, he said a man can give his wife a written notice of divorce and send her away. Well, yeah, that's exactly what he said. That's exactly what he said. The question isn't whether he can divorce. Now, what Jesus is going to do is he's going to point out that even the business that Moses gave is not the authority that God had in mind. It's a brilliant argument. We don't have time to get into it, and it's time to go anyway. But I just want to make sure that you get this. This discussion is Jesus elevating the subject to God's intentions. Okay? God's greatest intentions in a world where those intentions are not functioning at all anyway. Start with. We have to remember that where divorce had gotten in their world, and they were the only ones in the Western world, in the Roman Empire, where women weren't even people. They were property. And they could be divorced in a manner that is unimaginable. And guys, they were. Divorce was rife through the Roman world at that time. This was easy pickings. Women had no say, almost no say in their marriages. Do you know there was one thing that a woman could divorce her husband in under Jewish law? And that was if he had a job that made him so smelly that he was impossible to live with, and it made it impossible for her to fulfill her duties to have children with him because his job made him so obnoxiously, I guess the word would be stinky, that she couldn't bring herself to be with him in any manner physically. Now, I'm just saying, can you imagine that discussion? But there were a couple of professions that were like that. One of them was tanning. Guess who was a tanner? Paul the Apostle. And he was a Pharisee. Pharisees had a couple of things they had to be, and one was married. And when we meet him, he doesn't have a wife. My bet is he might have just smelled so bad back in the day that she just didn't want to have anything to do with him. But don't quote me on that, folks. I mean, we have no proof of that. And but that's I'm just throwing it out there. Okay. So are we all okay? Now, it's going to be 2 weeks. I'll catch us up, but we're going to get into this really cool argument that Jesus has. And he's not laying down law just willy-nilly. He's talking about stuff that's just really high and about God's heart for who we are and how we live together and things like that. So it's not this. It's all in this bigger picture of what's happening. Okay, we all okay with that? Great. Okay, I'll see you in 2 weeks.